Hi, welcome to the AIM on MS&T podcast. If this is your first time listening to our podcast, first off, welcome. We're happy to have you here. Second, AIM stands for Academia, Industry, and Military, which are the main sectors that make up Central Florida's modeling, simulation, and training community. On our podcast, we talk with different leaders in the MS&T community. We also talk about all the cool and innovative things their organizations are doing, trends that affect the MS&T field as a whole, and keep you up to date with what's going on. If you're not a part of the modeling and simulation community, we hope to share some insight about this important sector of Orlando's economy, which ranks just behind the theme park and hospitality industries. I'm your host, Kate Finkel, and we are recording this podcast during the Space Mobility Conference and Expo at the Orange County Convention Center in Orlando, Florida. On today's podcast, we are speaking with Tony Brown. Tony is the ITVAR Director and President of AFCEA Space Coast Chapter. Tony, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
To get us started, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? How did you get into your current position at the intersection of space exploration and modeling and simulation?
Long story, but I'll keep it short. I moved down from Washington, D.C. approximately 12 years ago.
Okay.
I used to travel back up to D.C. 3 to 4 times a month, and COVID hit. Mm-hmm. When COVID hit, I had to find a more sustainable model because I couldn't go back up to D.C. and kind of have those meetings. So I started with the AFCEA organization, which I'm the president and founder of the Space Coast Chapter.
Okay, yes.
I was going over to meetings in Tampa over at SOCOM and to support the combatant commands. Started to move my way around there, started to support that chapter and became the small business officer for that particular chapter. And at some point, I got tired of the drive across I-4 from St. Augustine and thought maybe we look at a different region.
Yeah.
And I thought that the Space Coast region was attractive. I didn't know much about space, but I decided
why not?
There was a need for that. And not just I decided, I just thought it would be a good ecosystem to try to foster. And when I first got there and I started asking about AFCEA, no one had heard about it. And I was like very disheartened, and challenges make me go a step higher. And especially if you see a need for your passion or what you can provide that would help out the community, then I'm all in.
Right.
And so as we started to look at that and have meetings, I met some potential team members. They said that they would take care of their part of attracting people in the area. They were very consistent in what they said, and all of a sudden, almost a year later, we're fully ingrained in the community, and we think that we're doing big things to help the command and the community.
Now, let's talk about space. First off, your organization, the AFCEA Space Coast Chapter, is a nonprofit membership association that serves the military, government, industry, and academia. But I don't want to steal your thunder. Please educate our listeners in your own words. What is the AFCEA Space Coast Chapter all about, and how does it serve the space community?
Great question. And we talk about space. What do we really know about space, first of all?
Yeah.
I mean, it's
big.
It's right. We're in our infancy of what we know about space. So I like to say I know nothing about space, by the way.
Okay.
But I do know engineers, and I do know people that I have met astronauts, and plenty of folks that support space, whether in industry or in the government. So I'm going to use my favorite word, collaboration. So that's what my passion is bringing all the pieces together. And when we speak of collaboration, we're not just talking about industry the way it sits right now. AFCEA, our chapter, AFCEA Space Coast, is very much centered on workforce development and STEM efforts. So we're bringing up and assisting the next generations to come to be able to help support the needs of not only the community, but the programs that we're supporting.
In recent years, we've seen an increase in space-related activity in Central and East Central Florida. Space exploration is opening more to the private sector, launches on the Space Coast are up, and the Space Force is currently moving a lot of its people and training assets here. And the Space Force is the newest member of Team Orlando. One of the defining traits of the Central Florida modeling, simulation, and training community is its spirit of collaboration. With all these activities, what current collaborations can you tell us about that you're especially excited about with the AFCEA Space Coast Chapter pursuing?
In the spirit of collaboration, when I first got down in the region and I started to drive down to the Cocoa area, Titusville and all those scenarios, it looked somewhat desolate. Okay.
Yeah.
Originally, I'm from Pittsburgh, so I know what a major industry looks like, and then have it leave. I see all the businesses and all of those scenarios. When I first got here, that's what I noticed.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow. But that was maybe if I even go 10 years ago. The changes that I've seen in the last 2 years have been huge.
Yeah.
And now the changes of what I'm seeing right now is even bigger.
Right.
And I'm starting to see that we have an organization that is there actually assisting with some. So I just had lunch with a Starcom asset. They're moving their headquarters and operations over here.
Oh, wow.
So just to see these types of things happening and growth and all of that is just such a pleasure to be involved in that.
Yeah.
Not from the ground, but somewhere along that way. But it does have a scenario where it looks like we're getting started from the ground.
Can you also tell us what are some partnering efforts going on right now among government, industry, and academic organizations that you know about that the Space Coast Chapter isn't necessarily part of, but you think will yield some interesting results?
In coming from the Washington, D.C. area and seeing other ecosystems that work. So first of all, what you have done with Team Orlando News is just great. So when I first got into the area and I started to look at ecosystems, imagine coming from D.C., which is the nation's capital, its ecosystem is very well refined. It's a oiled machine. And coming to another area, I had to figure out what the lay of the land is. So I started to go over to Tampa, very well-oiled machine.
Yes.
Orlando, I wasn't focused on, but as I started to look at the ecosystem down here, it's very well-oiled machine also. So Courtney Powell, which is now the AFCEA Space, not Space Coast, but Orlando president and founder. When I got here, he mentioned Team Orlando News, and I'm like, okay, never heard of that. And as I started to look at the ecosystem that you all had with all of the collaborations and all the groups and the news, I was like, wow, this is really great.
Yeah.
And then I started to see how much collaboration there was. So again, thank you for having me on this interview.
Of course.
And I look, instead of reinventing the wheel, why not try to create similar ecosystems that you know are successful?
Right.
So as I started to look at the Orlando community and the collaboration that you all have right down the beach line.
Yeah, pretty much.
Why not create similar ecosystems, maybe learn from lessons learned in this area and see if we can make it work over in the Space Coast regions. So you all are quote unquote like the modeling and sim world for us.
Yeah,
how about that?
There you go.
Okay.
Continuing on that topic, how would you say all those collaborations help elevate the message and build the space ecosystem?
Today we had an inaugural event of acquisition for space programs. Today we did the DoD session. Tomorrow we'll be doing a NASA session. Okay? So already kind of starting there, DoD and NASA.
Right.
I've learned in the Cape Canaveral region that space programs, where they're located on Cape Canaveral and Patrick Air Force Base, very interesting scenarios. I lived in D.C., and there's the corridor between Washington, D.C. and Baltimore.
Right.
If you ask somebody if they're going to Baltimore for a meeting in D.C., they're like, why would I go there? It's too far. And vice versa. I have learned down in the ecosystem that we have, it's almost the same scenario. From my knowledge, the space guys from NASA don't really interact a whole lot with Patrick, and vice versa. as I'm starting to see with this panel, the panels are what we're doing now. I actually had somebody come and ask questions from Blue Origin. I actually had folks from Airbus speaking, right, to the DoD community. So now this collaboration is starting to foster. Not saying it's my idea, but we're starting to see things happen within this proposed collaboration, and things are starting to move in that direction.
Looking towards the near future, what are the Space Coast Chapter's priorities going forward to further its mission? Is there anything coming down the pipeline soon that you can tell us about?
Wow, just hold on tight. Just hold on tight, because we just like to keep it moving. I mean, we just started this chapter 4/24/24. I remember the number. I can't even say April 24th, 24. It just, the numbers were so symbolic to me. The goals that we wrote down, first of all, if you ever asked me a year ago if we would have a chapter there and I would be the founder and president, it was not on my whiteboard.
Right.
Had no aspirations of it. It's something that fell into my lap, okay? If you told me a year ago again, we would be doing these acquisition panels. It was written down as a goal, and now it's happening. So when I first started the chapter, I had this tagline, which is not trademarked or anything: the sky is not the limit.
Okay.
Just hold on tight. We're going to see a lot of different things. I'm looking forward to collaborations with Team Orlando News, with possibly covering the Space Coast arena. Collaborative. Why reinvent the wheel when it doesn't need to be? And I feel so awkward saying reinvent the wheel when we're talking about space. Why reinvent the rocket? Well, Elon Musk has done that, right?
Right.
All the rockets used to drop off into the ocean and probably never see them again or be retrieved. Now we have them landing on drone ships.
Right.
That's how far we've come. So I want to keep at the speed of space. So like I say, hold on tight. This is a annual event that we had today. And in the future, I would like to do some big event maybe every 6 months. So look out for something in June. I'm not sure what it's going to be. That
would be exciting.
But just hold on tight.
All right.
Okay.
When a lot of us think of exploring outer space, our minds generally turn to the optimistic, JFK-inspired era of early achievement of landing on the moon. However, there are practical, realistic considerations that we need to recognize that aren't as bright, such as great powers of competition, for example, either on the ground or out in orbit. What do you think are the most significant challenges that American industry is facing or will face in the future that could threaten our space exploration efforts?
I would look at it from two separate viewpoints. Okay. So if you think about Space Force and the DoD efforts, is basically for space dominance and also to protect us from foreign adversaries,
right?
Whatever those challenges would be. And there are a number of challenges, by the way. When I hear them speak of some of the challenges, I'm like, wow, I would have never thought about that. But then when you think about it, you say,
that could happen.
Those are scenarios that could happen, right? So that's one, okay? So DoD has their priorities. And then I was sitting listening to a NASA engineer, and mining in space. Who would think of that?
Right.
Mining in space. Mars potentially having a human colony there. Medical needs for those folks that will be in that colony, because you're not going to have a hospital that an ambulance is going to be able to go to, right? So it's just amazing when you start to talk about these scenarios. And then my mind always goes back to this. We've only been covering kind of space or had agencies that were supporting space within the last 70 years. So let's take the oceans, okay? Explorers have been going over oceans for the last thousands of years, right? And the ocean is only a minuscule of what space is. So as much as we have these brilliant engineers and all of this, we still don't know anything about space.
That's true.
When I look at the nebula from images from the Hubble telescope and learn that they're thousands of light years away from us, I'm like, we know nothing. So it's just amazing where we're going in space. So I can't even pinpoint one scenario because it's so vast.
With increased space-related activity on the coast and in Central Florida, if any small businesses with innovative ideas wanted to enter the space game, how would you recommend they get involved, and what specific challenges should they expect?
Great question again. There's so many different ways. I think the ecosystem down here fosters a number of different avenues, whether there's groundswell, there's the SIVR and the SIVR programs for innovation. Air Force has like the Front Door and SpaceWorks and AFWorks. The universities in the area, Tech Grove, for instance. The ecosystem is just vast. There's so many different ways to small. And also meetings for organizations like AFCEA. I'm not necessarily plugging AFCEA, wink, wink, but there's several other community organizations that are supporting, like WID, NDIA, just so many organizations for small businesses to go to, start to network, get involved, and teaming with larger companies.
Right.
It's just a very robust infrastructure for that.
With all that being said, how could current participant organizations be highlighted as collaborative partners?
I think there are many ways. Small businesses are, in scenarios like this, really need to get out.
Yeah.
They need to evangelize their business. They need to understand the audience that they're speaking with. I have been in so many situations. Matter of fact, I'll give you a story. One of our sponsors, Rapid Prototyping, we had a NASA speaker for innovation come up.
Okay.
And it was NASA, or it might have been somebody from Team Orlando, but make a long story short, when they found out that he was a sponsor and he got a few minutes to speak and he had a little table at our event, literally the two folks from the government looked over and they're like, oh, he does that? We've been looking for someone that does that.
Yeah.
And literally they were asking me for his information. And that's when I started to realize exactly what you were saying. How can businesses be highlighted? So there's so many different ways. When I started in Tampa trying to get our name out for TM3, I did raffle sponsorships because that was the lowest tier.
Yeah.
And I brought some very interesting gifts, which I won't talk about.
Okay.
But we started to get our name out there, and next thing you know, things happen. So it's getting out, evangelizing, and scenarios like that.
What significant milestones do you think the American space industry will reach in the foreseeable future, given its current trajectory and momentum?
I would say the amount of launches, again, I hate to keep plugging my DC background.
No, go for it.
I've come from the nation's capital to the space launch capital of the world.
Right.
So, one, the space launches, they're just going to continue to go up. I think we had 93 to 94 on the Cape last year. So that's going to grow probably almost double.
Yeah.
And so that's one. NASA speaking about the Artemis mission, going back to the moon. There's just so many milestones that are coming up. And we're looking at Mars.
Yeah.
There's just so many things.
Right.
So those are the ones that I think of immediately, but it's just going to be, again, sky's the limit. They've got so many things. When you hear these engineers start to talk, I'm just sitting there going, wow.
Right.
Yeah, it's just amazing. So can't even kind of put a gauge on it because there's so many different things.
Finally, I'm going to ask you to put your nerd hat on. Given enough time, science fiction can sometimes become science fact, and things we see in sci-fi TV shows and movies occasionally turn into things we actually use on a daily basis. The original Star Trek TV series, for example, showed us communications technology that we recognize now as just a normal cell phone. Playing with utter speculation here, what type of gadget that's currently just a fun science fiction concept do you think kids who are about 10 years old right now could feasibly use in the course of their lifetimes, particularly a gadget that is the result of solving problems in the pursuit of space exploration?
Wow, that's a great question. Now, 10 years old, it's a long time.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I can't think of what it would be like for me to be a 10-year-old again. But I've got to tell you something. I'm a big Trekkie fan. So I've seen all of the original Star Treks. I think one of the most interesting one would be the transporter room and Beam Me Up Scotty. Okay. Now, I think that's really far-fetched.
Yeah.
But I would really like that for two purposes. One, if I did have a 10-year-old kid, I could beam him out of the bring him out of the area for a little while, and then bring him back whenever I needed to. But it would be a quick way for me to travel to Amsterdam for a weekend and
that
come
would be
back.
Nice. Mm-hmm.
So that would be one of mine.
Okay.
We're already past the flip, whatever you call the communications device. We're way past all of those things. But I just think the Star Trek scenarios were so interesting. Great question, by the way.
Tony, thank you for taking time to speak with us and sharing your experience with us today.
So I'd really like to thank you for the opportunity to have this interview, and to the Team Orlando News team. Okay. All right. So just excited about what you all have going on, interested in how you're going to innovate and see what's coming up new. So this is a two-way street. Anytime you need anything from me, let me know.
Thank you. For everyone listening, to keep you updated on future events in the modeling and simulation community, check out our website, teamorlando.org. You'll also find us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook for more recent news and upcoming events. If you're interested in sponsoring an episode of AIM on MS&T or being a featured guest, please reach out to Team Orlando News. The link will be below. We are now going to end this episode here. Again, I'd like to thank our guest Tony for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and don't forget to follow the AIM on MS&T podcast on your platform of choice, and we will see you in the next one. Bye!